Hi, I'm Evette. My sister once handed me a salad that didn't smell right. She smiled like nothing was wrong, like it was just another Sunday. I didn't eat it. I gave it to her husband instead. 30 minutes later, he collapsed in front of all of us. But that wasn't the beginning. That was just the moment everything they'd been hiding cracked open. Because what hurts more than betrayal is realizing they counted on you never fighting back. And now I have to ask, how do you stay in a family that thinks you're easiest to erase? I wasn't late to the party, but I arrived like I was interrupting something. The back patio was already full, every seat taken, every drink halfway finished, every conversation already in motion. It was Morelle's house, of course. She hosted everything these days. Ever since our father passed, she'd made herself the center of every family moment, like grief had crowned her queen. I walked in with a bottle of wine that I knew no one had asked for. The kind of offering you bring when you're not sure if you're wanted, but you show up anyway. Mom waved at me from across the table, a tight smile under her tinted sunglasses. Morelle was standing near the buffet, arranging a tray of deviled eggs like it was national television. She looked over her shoulder, spotted me, and her face lit up in that way it always does. Too bright, too smooth. "There she is," she called. "Come sit, we saved you a spot." That was a lie. I knew it was a lie because I watched her motion to Callan, the housekeeper, 2 minutes before I stepped into view. A folding chair was dragged in from the garage, squeezed between the corner and a flower pot. Still, I smiled and walked over, because this wasn't new. As I sat down, Morelle brought over a salad bowl. Small, porcelain. One of the expensive ones she doesn't use for everyone else. "I made this one just for you," she said, voice syrupy. "Thought of you the whole time." I blinked. "Just for me?" She nodded. "You always say you like almonds and pomegranate, so I thought, why not?" It was too much, too nice, too curated. "Thanks," I said, taking the bowl carefully, like it might bite. She gave my shoulder a gentle squeeze before walking away, her heels clicking softly on the brick patio. I glanced around. No one else had the same bowl. Most had paper plates from the stack near the drinks cooler. Mine was the only porcelain dish. That was the first red flag. But not the last. I looked down at the salad. Romaine hearts, sliced almonds, pomegranate seeds, a vinaigrette that glistened under the May sunlight like honeyed oil. A sprig of something green sat on top. Maybe mint. Maybe not. I picked up my fork and gave it a stir. The scent wafted up and hit me in a place that wasn't quite memory and wasn't quite nausea. It wasn't rotten, but it wasn't right either. Across from me, Daniel, Morelle's husband, was talking about roofing permits with my uncle. He wasn't paying attention. No one was. Except Morelle. She was standing across the patio near the iced tea dispenser, pretending to laugh at something Callan said. But her eyes were locked on me, unblinking, like a hawk waiting to see if the mouse takes the bait. My fingers tightened around the fork. I dipped it into the salad, lifted a few leaves, and tilted my head like I was admiring the craftsmanship. "Come on," Daniel said, nudging me. "She worked hard on that. Don't make her regret it." I smiled back at him. He meant nothing by it. He never does. He's one of those men who lives in the world as it presents itself. No subtext, no shadows. He turned his attention back to his conversation, and I took my chance. When he stood to check on their daughter, I reached across the table, casually, effortlessly, and swapped our bowls. I made it look like I was adjusting the silverware. A flutter of the napkin, a shift in the breeze. No one noticed, not even Morelle, or so I thought. I began eating from his salad. It was dry, underdressed, not nearly as fragrant, but it was safe, or at least it tasted safe. When Daniel returned, he sat and continued eating, my original salad, without hesitation. And I watched. Every bite he took felt like a countdown I couldn't hear, but could feel. 1, 2, 3. Morelle's smile slipped. Not fully, just a crack. The corner of her mouth tightened, then quickly recovered. She caught me watching her. I didn't look away. If that salad had been for me, and I knew now it had, then what happened next wasn't just a test. It was a reveal. I placed my fork down, wiped my mouth gently, reached for my water. She was still smiling, but her hands had stopped moving, and that told me more than words ever could. She poured herself another glass of tea. Slow, deliberate. One hand on the pitcher, the other smoothing the condensation with her thumb, like it was some sort of nervous tick. I noticed it because it was the only movement Morel had made in 10 minutes. Everyone else at the table was back to eating, chatting, laughing at stories I'd already heard twice. But not me. I wasn't really tasting anything. My eyes flicked to Daniel, who was nearly done with the salad I was meant to eat. He didn't seem to notice. He was chewing and nodding, telling Uncle Dean about the price of lumber and how the city council had lost its mind with permit restrictions. Typical. Then, just as he reached for his water, he paused. A cough, short, dry. Then another. I didn't move, not yet. He set his glass down, cleared his throat, and forced a laugh. I think I swallowed wrong. But his hand went to his chest. He coughed again, this time louder. It echoed under the awning. Chairs squeaked, forks clinked. Morel's head jerked toward him, her fingers frozen mid-lift over her plate. I caught the way her pupils darted from his face to the salad bowl and back again. Her other hand reached under the table, gripping something. Maybe nothing, maybe control. Daniel wheezed once, hard. His body tensed. He tried to stand but wobbled, caught the edge of the table, then dropped into the chair again with a heavy thud. Panic started like a ripple. Someone gasped, someone dropped a napkin. Mom stood up. Daniel, honey? He waved a hand but couldn't catch his breath. And I just sat there. I wasn't frozen. I wasn't stunned. I was listening. To my own thoughts, to the sounds around me, to the fact that no one was looking at me. Morel jumped to her feet. He's probably allergic to something. Almonds, maybe? Since when is he allergic? I asked calmly, like I was asking about the weather. He eats trail mix like it's breakfast. She flinched, just barely. But I saw it. Someone called 911. Someone else helped him inside. I stayed seated. Then it hit me. She wasn't scared he was choking. She was scared I wasn't. The ambulance arrived quickly. Daniel had started to come around by then, enough to mumble a few words, enough to nod. They helped him onto the stretcher, asked him questions he half answered. Morel hovered but didn't speak much. Her eyes kept darting between him and me. As they wheeled him toward the van, I followed slowly. No rush. My pace was measured, each step grounding me, each breath a reminder. I'm still here. One of the medics glanced at me. You family? His sister-in-law. He nodded. He's stable for now. We'll run a tox screen to be sure. Could have been a reaction. Could have, but wasn't. I didn't say it out loud. I didn't need to. Back inside, the table was nearly abandoned. Mom was sitting off to the side, fidgeting with her pearls. Charles was talking to a neighbor who'd shown up late. Only Morel remained at the table, sipping her wine, eyes fixed on the empty seat Daniel had left. I walked over and sat across from her. Don't, she said before I even opened my mouth. You're not going to do this here. I tilted my head. Do what? She didn't answer. Funny, I continued. How you made a special salad for me, and now he's the one in an ambulance. She set her glass down hard enough for the stem to rattle. You think I poisoned my husband? I think I was supposed to eat that salad. Her lips parted, then closed again. She shook her head and muttered, Jesus Christ, Evette, you've always needed to be the victim, haven't you? That stung, not because it wasn't cruel, but because it was familiar, like she'd been rehearsing that line. I didn't argue. I didn't yell. I stood up, tucked my chair in, and leaned close enough for only her to hear. You're right, I said. I needed to be, but not anymore. I turned and walked toward the side door, toward the sunroom, toward the quiet. The sound of laughter had long faded. All that was left was the hum of the refrigerator and the buzz in my ears. Later, I sat in my car for a long time before starting the engine. My hands didn't tremble. I wasn't afraid. I was angry, but not the kind that makes you slam doors or scream into the void. It was colder than that. Sharper. At home, I washed my hands twice. Then I opened my journal, wrote down the time, the symptoms, who was sitting where, what was said, what wasn't. Then I wrote one line across the top of a blank page. She didn't flinch when he coughed, but she did when I spoke. No one asked why only my plate had almonds, but I had started asking, and that was the problem. I stared at the blank page for a few minutes longer, then closed the journal and set it aside on the counter. The house was quiet except for the occasional passing car outside, tires swishing across damp pavement. Rain had started at some point after I got home. Not a storm, just a steady drizzle that tapped against the windows and gave the evening a dull, hollow rhythm. I made myself a cup of tea, more for the warmth in my hands than for the taste. And as the kettle hissed and clicked off, a thought came uninvited. It wasn't the first time. 3 years ago, almost to the month, there was another gathering, this one smaller. Backyard cookout. Morel had brought a salad then too, said it was a new recipe she was testing. It looked the same, almost exactly. Spinach this time, not romaine, but the same vinaigrette, same almonds, same too perfect color balance, and the same feeling, like something was just wrong. Back then, I took a few bites, then pushed it around the plate. My head started buzzing halfway through dinner. My stomach twisted on the drive home. By the time I got inside, my vision was blurry, and the room spun every time I moved. I called Mom the next day, told her something about that salad had made me sick. "Oh, honey," she said, barely pausing between words. "Morel made that with love. You know how much she tries." I remember silence sitting between us for several seconds. "I think it had something in it," I said quietly. "You've always had a sensitive system," she replied, then added, "and maybe a sensitive imagination." Later, when I mentioned it to Morel, she laughed. "You're kidding, right? It was organic, all natural. You probably ate too fast or something." It was like speaking into fog. No pushback, no curiosity, just a thick wall of disbelief dressed as care. And I let it go. That's the part that still stings. I let it go. That night, I slept sitting up on the couch, a trash can next to me and a cold rag on my forehead. No one called to check. No one asked if I was okay. It wasn't just the nausea. It was the kind of sick that made you doubt yourself. The kind that whispers, maybe they're right. Maybe you are the problem. I never brought it up again. I stuffed it into the back of my mind, along with other little moments that didn't add up, but were easier to ignore than confront. But today, watching Daniel cough, double over, wheeze with his face pale and sweating, I realized it hadn't been my imagination. It had just been easier for everyone else to pretend it was. Back in the present, I sat at the kitchen table, tea in hand, the steam curling into my face as if trying to comfort me. I thought about how easy it is for families to smooth things over, to file down the edges of something ugly until it fits better on a holiday plate. We do it all the time. We call it keeping the peace. We call it being the bigger person. But sometimes all it really is abandoning yourself. Because peace without honesty isn't peace. It's submission. And that's what I had done for years. Submitted. I opened my laptop, pulled up a blank document, and began typing everything I could remember. Not just from today. From that cookout 3 years ago. From the phone call with Mom. From the moment Morel handed me that salad, smiling like she'd done me a favor. I wrote the timeline, the symptoms, the reactions, the non-reactions. I didn't dramatize it. I didn't exaggerate. I just told the truth. Then I opened the Notes app on my phone and created a folder. I labeled it, "If It Happens Again." I wasn't planning revenge. I wasn't planning anything, really. But I'd spent too much of my life not documenting things that mattered, because I wanted to believe they didn't. No one had called. No one had texted. Not Morel. Not Mom. Not even a generic, "Hey, hope you're okay." The silence was loud enough to choke on. I turned my phone over and whispered into the room. "You believed her before. What's it gonna take for you to believe me now?" The clock ticked in the background. Outside, the rain kept falling. I didn't cry. I didn't pace. I didn't scream into the air or throw anything. I just sat there, the kind of stillness that isn't calm, just complete. The kind that comes when you've stopped waiting for someone to rescue you. But someone else noticed something today, and she didn't look away. The rain had stopped sometime before dawn, but the clouds hadn't gone anywhere. By mid-afternoon, the sky was still hanging low, gray and heavy, like it hadn't decided yet if it was done with me. I pulled into Morel's driveway slowly, the same way you approach a sleeping dog you're not sure remembers biting you. Her SUV wasn't there, which was exactly what I'd counted on. I'd waited until I knew she'd be out, an afternoon appointment at the salon Mom mentioned in passing 2 nights ago. The excuse I gave was simple. I left a scarf. Technically true. I'd brought one in my purse and deliberately tucked it behind a chair in the sunroom. Callan answered the door with the same tight smile she always wore around me. Half politeness, half exhaustion. She stepped aside to let me in without saying anything. I thanked her, stepped in, and took a moment to breathe in the house. It still smelled like lemon polish and something floral. Artificial, pretty, false. I didn't head for the sunroom. Instead, I drifted toward the kitchen like I was just wandering, as if I were still the kind of guest that belonged. Callan followed, quiet steps behind mine. When I stopped near the pantry, she didn't pretend not to notice. She leaned slightly on the doorframe and said, low and clear, "I didn't make that salad, you know." I didn't respond right away. Instead, I turned to look at her. Really look. She wasn't nervous. She wasn't apologizing, but she wasn't smug either. "You saw her make it?" I asked, my voice steady. Her jaw tightened. She brought her own ingredients, told me to handle the rest. But she fixed that plate herself in the corner. Told me not to touch it. I nodded once, letting it land. "You have cameras in here, don't you?" I asked, even though I already knew. I'd seen the little black dome in the upper corner last summer when I helped Mom clean out the fridge during a barbecue. She hesitated for a beat, then walked over to a low cabinet beneath the counter and opened it. Inside, a slim black DVR box. She pressed a button. The screen on the wall-mounted monitor flickered on. She clicked through the files without being asked, picked the one from the birthday lunch, scrolled to the right timestamp, and there it was. Morel standing at the island, lifting a small glass jar from her tote bag. The label faced the camera for a brief second. Then she peeled it off, replaced the cap, and poured the contents into the salad bowl already prepped with romaine. She stirred it lightly, just that one bowl, not the big one for everyone else. Then she covered it with plastic wrap and placed it neatly at the end of the buffet table. Nothing dramatic, nothing overt, but intentional. Callan didn't say a word. I watched the clip 3 times, each one harder to stomach than the last. She didn't try to stop her. But she didn't lie about it now either. When the video ended, the silence between us felt like a hallway I didn't want to walk down. "I won't say anything," Callan said, not unkindly. "But I can't get involved. I've worked for this family too long." I nodded. I didn't expect her to fight for me. I just needed to know I hadn't imagined it. She started to walk away, but paused at the door. Without turning around, she said, "I knew it wasn't right, but I didn't know who she meant it for." "She never meant it for him," I answered. "He just got in the way." I pulled out my phone, took a photo of the paused frame. Morel, mid-motion, hand on the jar. Then I tapped into my cloud storage and uploaded the file. Titled it, Salad Footage, Full. I didn't plan to use it yet, but I wasn't going to let it disappear either. As I stepped out the back door, the air felt heavier than when I'd arrived. Like the house itself knew what I'd seen. In the car, I sat for a moment before starting the engine. My hands rested on the steering wheel. Calm, collected. For the first time since this all began, I wasn't wondering if I was overreacting. She did it, and now I could prove it. That evening, my phone lit up, and it wasn't a message. It was a mistake. Same name, different notification, a voice memo, Morel. My first instinct was to think it was intentional. Maybe she wanted to start a fight, send a warning, but the subject line just said, "Sent 8:07 p.m., no context, no follow-up." I stared at it for a few seconds too long. Then I tapped it. The message started mid-sentence, like she hadn't realized it was recording at first. "She really thinks she's safe now." Morel's voice, relaxed, like she was lounging somewhere with wine in her hand. God, she's dumber than I thought. I stopped breathing. Then came the part that changed everything. Let her eat it. Let's see how golden she still feels when she's gasping for air. My hand stayed still. My thumb hovered just above the screen. There was laughter in the background. Faint, familiar. And it wasn't just hers. I played it again. This time with headphones, eyes closed, focused. I listened to the clip the way someone listens to a secret they didn't mean to hear but can't unhear. The phrasing wasn't vague. There was no misinterpretation. It wasn't frustration. It wasn't sarcasm. It was intent. She'd said it. Out loud. And it wasn't just a joke between sisters. It was a statement between predators. And that laugh in the background? It didn't belong to a stranger. It was Mom. Soft, nervous, almost hesitant. But it was hers. Not encouraging, but not stopping it either. That part settled deeper than anything. I backed up the file 3 ways: cloud, external drive, and printed transcript. I didn't want to take any chances. Then I transcribed the entire clip word for word. Not because I needed it for evidence, though maybe I did, but because I needed to see it on paper, to feel the reality of it in ink. It wasn't a voice inside my head this time. It was hers, recorded, real. And she couldn't take it back. I sat with it for a while, let it steep like tea, like grief. Then, when the clock passed midnight, I sent her a single text. "You sent something last night." I saved it. I put my phone on the windowsill and let the rain lull me back into something like sleep. The morning came with a muted sky and not much appetite. I opened my phone. Still no response. By noon, I'd started to believe she might ignore it completely. But then the reply came in. Short, clipped, defensive. "You're bluffing. Be careful who you try to threaten. No apology, no denial, just deflection. A warning wrapped in arrogance." I didn't type a word in return, just sent a thumbs-up emoji, a digital shrug, a placeholder. The kind of answer that lets them sit with their own words. That afternoon, I cleaned the apartment. Not out of stress, out of clarity. Wiped the counters, took out the trash, folded laundry with more care than usual. I was still the same person, but something had shifted. I didn't feel nervous anymore, or doubtful, or naive. I felt prepared. That voice memo didn't shake me. But what she did next? That nearly did. 2 days passed in a kind of strange calm. It wasn't peace, just the pause before something drops. I didn't hear from Morel again, not directly. But when I got a text that simply said, "Let's talk," I knew she was ready to shift tactics. She suggested a public spot, neutral ground. A little cafe downtown that's too trendy for either of us, but safe enough to keep voices down and scenes contained. That's how women in families like mine manage war. Under lattes and between half smiles. I arrived a few minutes early, half to claim the corner booth, half to center myself. I wore navy and flats, non-confrontational choices. But my hair was tied back and my phone was fully charged. Morel came in looking like she always does. Perfectly put together, expensive but casual. Like she's been complimented so often, she forgot what it's like to walk into a room and not be noticed. She smiled, the kind that doesn't reach her eyes, and slid into the seat across from me. She didn't waste time. "Before we start," she said, reaching into her tote, "I want to clear up something. She pulled out a manila folder and set it on the table between us. Slowly, deliberately, like it was a peace offering. I didn't touch it. I waited. She flipped it open and pushed one sheet forward. Do you recognize this? I didn't need to read it in full. The layout was burned into my memory, my signature, scrawled hurriedly at the bottom. 4 years ago, she had asked me to sign something for tax purposes while I was cooking dinner and juggling a call with work. I hadn't asked too many questions. She was my sister. It wasn't about taxes. It was a property transfer. The lake house, Dad's name removed, hers inserted, mine erased. I felt something heavy settle in my chest. Not pain, not surprise, recognition. You stole it, I said softly. She raised an eyebrow. It was never yours. You never even went out there. That's not the point. Then what is? Her voice was cool, but her eyes were scanning me, watching for tremors. You never wanted responsibility. You just want something to be mad about. I didn't bite. I just looked at her. Really looked. She wasn't sorry. She was proud, and we weren't done. She slipped the folder back into her bag, then pulled out her phone and turned it toward me. It was a photo. Grainy, but clear enough. Me, 6 years ago, at a party. Eyes glazed, cheeks flushed, dress twisted on one shoulder. Someone had snapped it when I'd stumbled onto the patio after one too many drinks. She tapped the screen. Say anything else about that memo, or the salad, or whatever fantasy you've spun, and this goes out. Clients, friends, maybe even Mom. You know how people are. I looked at the photo. I remembered the night. I remembered trusting the people around me, not to weaponize it. Blackmail? I asked. She shook her head, laughing under her breath. You've always been dramatic. I reached for my water, took a sip, then set it down slowly. You think I still care what they think? I said. You don't know me anymore. For a second, I could swear her jaw twitched. Just a little. But I stood up, grabbed my bag, and leaned in just enough that only she could hear me. You should have deleted the voicemail first, I said. Then I walked out. The street outside was loud with traffic, but I heard none of it. I moved like I was underwater, focused, untouchable. My feet carried me to the parking garage as if they had a plan before I did. In the car, I texted Joelle. I need to pull up something I signed in 2019. Can we talk tonight? She replied within a minute. Already at my desk. Call me. I didn't call. Not yet. I scrolled to the voice memo in my phone. Morel's voice still sat there, smug and sharp. I pressed forward, titled it, For When Silence No Longer Protects. And just like that, the next step was clear. But Morel didn't wait. She moved faster and dirtier. The sun hadn't fully cleared the horizon when the email landed. I was halfway through my first cup of coffee, not quite awake, but too restless to sleep in. The subject line was formal, sterile. Notice of potential legal action. The sender was from a law firm I recognized. Not because I'd ever used them, but because Morel had once bragged about how fast they made things disappear. I opened it slowly, bracing myself like the page might explode. The letter was a preemptive threat, worded just carefully enough to avoid being called blackmail, but blunt in intent. It accused me of engaging in defamatory behavior that may result in reputational harm, and warned that any release of edited audio, fabricated documents, or confidential family materials would be met with immediate legal retaliation. I read it twice. Then I forwarded it to Joelle with a single note. This just got real. I didn't panic, not this time. Instead, I got dressed, tied my hair back, and headed out to Nadine's house, because she'd texted earlier asking if I'd drop by. Said she'd rather talk in person than over the phone. No mention of Morel being there, no mention of anything else. The kitchen was warm, cluttered with half-finished errands and unopened mail. It looked lived in, not curated for anyone's approval. Nadine was stirring something on the stove. Maybe soup. It smelled like garlic and old habits. You okay? she asked, not turning around. Define okay. She sighed, nodded once, and handed me a dish rag. We moved in rhythm, her cleaning counters, me drying a few dishes, like we'd done 1,000 times before when I was still under that roof. Iveria, Morel's daughter, was on the floor nearby with her tablet, completely absorbed in whatever show was holding her attention. I talked to Morel, Nadine said eventually. She's upset, feels attacked. I didn't respond. Let her sit with the sound of her own words. You know how she is, she continued, always dramatic when things don't go her way. I know exactly how she is, I said, turning toward her. Before Nadine could answer, Ivoria chimed in without looking up. Mom said if Aunt Evette ate the salad, all the drama would be over. The room froze. Nadine's hand stopped mid-wipe. The dish towel dropped to the floor, like someone had cut the string. I looked at my mother, really looked. The lines around her eyes, the tremble at her mouth. She didn't deny it. She didn't even try. Instead, she looked down. At the counter. At the floor. Anywhere but at me. You knew, I said, voice low. I didn't, she replied. But it was too soft, too late. She said that in front of your granddaughter. You still think this is just a sibling argument? She didn't mean it like that. I'm done trying to interpret the tone behind poison. Silence settled thick in the space between us. Even the sounds from Iveria's tablet faded into the background. I picked up my bag, moved slowly, not out of hesitation, but control. As I slung it over my shoulder, Nadine reached out, but didn't touch me. I didn't know it would go this far, she whispered. I didn't blink. You didn't want to. And that was the difference. Outside, the sky was turning the color of steel. I stood on the porch for a moment, letting the wind hit my face, then pulled out my phone and called Joelle. I'm ready, let's go public. She didn't ask questions. She just said, Okay, I've got you. That night, I didn't sleep much. But I didn't toss and turn either. I worked. I organized everything. The audio file, the video footage, the toxicology report from Dr. Sorrell. I uploaded them all into a shared drive, labeled the folder, If Anything Happens to Me. Then I drafted a timeline, not just the events, who said what, who stood by, who looked away. Because this wasn't just about what happened. It was about how everyone made space for it to happen. Morel always moved fast, but this time I moved faster. 2 days later, I parked across the street from the house I grew up in. It wasn't mine anymore. Technically, it hadn't been for years. But emotionally, that front porch still knew the weight of my footsteps. That dining room still remembered every birthday, every broken promise, every time I was asked to be quiet for the sake of the family. This was the table where we all used to sit. Sunday dinners, unspoken rules, looks that said more than words ever could. Nadine had called this meeting, said it was time to clear the air. I already knew better. Families like ours don't clear air. We just stir the dust. Inside, she'd set the table herself. That was rare. No Callan, no catering trays, just the old china, the real silverware, and water glasses that hadn't been used since our father's funeral. Morel was already seated, looking like she'd just stepped off a magazine spread. Crisp blouse, expensive watch, a smile that said she was in control. Kester sat beside her, stiff but present. Charles, our cousin, was there too, brought in under the guise of neutral party, though he looked like he wanted to be anywhere else. Averia sat next to her father, swinging her feet beneath the table, blissfully unaware. I arrived last. In my hand, a manila envelope, a printed medical report, and my phone with one file queued and ready. Nobody said a word when I walked in. No hugs. No, how are you? Just silence, like the room had been holding its breath and didn't know how to exhale. I took the seat across from Morel. No small talk. I placed the envelope gently in front of me, then opened it and pulled out the paper. The toxicology report, I said, reading the header aloud. Confirms allergenic compounds were present in the dressing used on one specific plate. Compounds known to trigger respiratory distress in people with blood type B positive, which, by the way, is mine, not Daniel's. Nadine shut her eyes. Just for a second. Charles rubbed his hands together beneath the table. I didn't send it to the police, I added. Yet. Then I opened the voice memo on my phone. Hit play. Morel's voice filled the room. She really thinks she's safe now. God, she's dumber than I thought. Pause. Let her eat it. Let's see how golden she still feels when she's gasping for air. Dead silence. No sound from the kitchen. No shuffling of feet. Just the weight of that voice hanging over the table like a dropped curtain. I pressed pause. No one moved. Morel finally blinked, then tilted her head. Deepfakes are everywhere these days, she said, almost casually. You can make anyone say anything now. That's not AI, I said, keeping my voice even. That's your wine glass clinking, your voice, and Mom's laugh in the background. I turned to Nadine. You were there. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. And just in case anyone needs more, I said, tapping my phone again, here's footage of you. I nodded toward Morel, switching out the dressing, just on one bowl, mine. Charles shifted in his seat, looked down at the tablecloth. Ivrea kept swinging her feet, oblivious. Morel leaned forward, voice icy. You've always needed to feel victimized, Evette. You twist things until they fit your story. You love to feel wronged. I locked eyes with her. No, I just stopped pretending it was fine. Kester stood up, not hurried, not dramatic. He just rose, looked at me and said, I didn't know, but I'm sorry I didn't look closer. He didn't look at his wife, not once. Nadine stood next, but not to speak. She just walked out of the room, slowly, hands tucked into the sleeves of her cardigan like she needed to hold herself together. Morel stayed seated. Her smile was gone. Her jaw was tight. But still, no apology, no remorse, just silence. I gathered my papers, slid them back into the envelope, took my phone, stood slowly. I'm not here to ruin anyone, I said, scanning the room. I just won't keep being the easiest one to ruin. Then I walked out. Not a rushed exit, no door slamming, just a deliberate, measured departure. The hallway didn't echo the same way it used to. The front door didn't creak like I remembered. Outside, the air was cooler than I'd expected. Crisp. Still. I didn't expect anything after that. But sometimes, what happens after is what matters most. 3 weeks passed. Not fast, not quietly, just through. Like wading across a river that doesn't care whether you make it or not. I didn't hear from Morel. That part didn't surprise me. I didn't expect flowers or apologies or some long, teary explanation. People like her don't unravel. They recalculate. But I did hear from Kester. It arrived early one morning in a plain white envelope. No return address, just my name. Written in the kind of handwriting that comes from someone who presses a little too hard with the pen. I knew it was him before I opened it. The letter was short. No grand confessions, no dramatic punctuation. Just the truth, told the way decent people tell it when they're ashamed they didn't say it sooner. He said he didn't realize how much he'd been used. That silence wasn't neutral when someone like Morel was steering it. That letting things slide is only harmless until it hurts someone else. I didn't know what she was doing, he wrote, but I didn't want to know either. And that's on me. The last line stuck with me most. You weren't the one who broke this family. You were just the only one brave enough to say it was broken. I folded it once, put it in the back of my journal. I didn't cry, but I let myself sit with it for a while. Later that week, I walked past a billboard downtown. I stopped in my tracks. Not because it was shocking, but because it was familiar. A marketing campaign, a visual I'd drafted years ago during a freelance pitch that was never credited. The layout, the color scheme, even the tagline, word for word. Of course, my name wasn't on it, but my fingerprints were all over it. I didn't take a photo. I didn't email anyone. I didn't launch a lawsuit. I just whispered to myself, they can keep the credit. I kept my soul. And then I walked on. A few blocks later, I ducked into the little bookstore cafe near the university campus. The kind of place that still puts real foam on cappuccinos and carries titles from small presses nobody talks about. It smelled like dust and ink and old stories. I wandered past the memoir section, not really looking for anything, until I saw it. My book, the self-published one, printed on a budget, promoted by word of mouth, and a few late-night posts I'd almost deleted before hitting send. Someone had donated a copy to the store's community shelf, and they'd given it a real spine label. Shelved it under Family and Healing. There it was. A woman standing nearby picked it up, flipped it open, stopped at the dedication page. To those who survived the silence, and spoke anyway. She didn't buy it, just smiled and set it back, as if the words had landed somewhere anyway. That was enough. Later that afternoon, I visited the cemetery. I hadn't been in a while. The place hadn't changed much. Still quiet, still lined with maples that dropped leaves faster than the groundskeepers could collect them. I walked slowly, lavender in hand, not roses. Dad had always thought roses were too loud. I stood for a while, didn't say much out loud. Some conversations don't need volume. Some goodbyes are just quiet steps away from what never healed the way you hoped. But I felt something loosen, and that was enough. As I left, walking toward the cemetery gate, my phone buzzed. Joelle, your story is doing numbers. People are listening. I smiled. Not a big smile, just the kind that settles somewhere behind the ribs, because I wasn't chasing applause. I wasn't chasing vindication. I just needed to stop disappearing. I used to wonder if I was being too sensitive, if I made things up, if maybe I was the one with the sharp edges. But not anymore. I didn't need them to see me clearly. I just needed to see myself. And for the first time, my voice wasn't shaking, and it wasn't quiet. Before we close this story, let me say this. If you've made it this far, maybe something here hit close to home. Maybe it reminded you of a time when your truth was doubted, or your silence was mistaken for weakness. I've learned that silence isn't always peace. Sometimes it's fear. Sometimes it's exhaustion. And sometimes it's a survival skill. But if there's one thing this journey taught me, it's this. Speaking up may not fix everything, but it changes you. It puts your name back where it belongs. It makes you visible again. We don't always get the apology. We rarely get the recognition. But we can take back our voice. And that's power. Now I want to hear from you. Have you ever felt like the truth was too quiet to be heard? Or that speaking up came with too high a cost? If this story made you think, made you feel something, drop a 1 in the comments, or tell me what city or state you're watching from. Let's start a conversation, because sometimes just knowing you're not the only one is enough to keep going. And hey, if this story resonated with you and you want more stories like it, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. I've got more coming your way, real voices, real struggles, and the kind of quiet strength that doesn't make headlines, but changes lives. Thanks for being here. Let's keep going, together.